their bladders. But wow, we watched that movie. Hello, I'm assuming that you are. Yeah, please. Well, and then we'll wait for the third, and then I'll have y'all introduce yourselves. Yeah, this is totally casual. Full disclosure, we have 40 minutes maximum for this. So I'll make sure that our panel kind of goes through the prepared questions first. Oh no, Andy, come back.
I am.
Okay, sorry. Well, the chaotic energy of this already, I mean, that just really reflects so well for the movie that we just witnessed. Just as a brief reminder, I'm Claire Lechtenberg. I'm the Director of Development and Marketing at the Independent Picture House. Thank you, appreciate it. I also was a double major at Queen's University of Charlotte, RIP, it's becoming Queelon. No disrespect, Queens, but I did get to, one of my majors was English Literature and Creative Writing. So I graduated in 2017.
I graduated in 2014.
Okay, so my freshman year, you were at Queen's.
Yeah.
Fun, oh my gosh. We probably walked past each other on campus and I was just like a little freshman listening to music in my headphones. Well, I did get the honor of pretending to read this book in college for my British literature class taught by Dr. McGavran.
Yeah.
Incredible. So in my pretending to read, I read about 3 chapters and then was really bored and decided to just watch the 1992 Ray Fiennes adaptation, which close enough. So in preparation of this movie, I decided, let's read it for real. And what a great book. So out of curiosity, who here has read Wuthering Heights? Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we're pretty split. I'll give you a brief rundown and synopsis of that book because it's very, very different from what we just experienced as a group. So Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte actually follows 2 generations. It does start with Heathcliff arriving at Wuthering Heights. He is noted as a dark-skinned little boy, and the race is a really, really big part of the book. Everyone continues to look down on him because he is a different skin color. So there's a whole narrative of race and class.
And he's poor.
And he's poor because he's an orphan and they don't know where he came from. There are theories that maybe he is Mr. Earnshaw's illegitimate son, so that would make him and Kathy half-siblings. But I'll let the professor get more into that. So all to say that Kathy and Heathcliff, they did have a very toxic relationship with each other. She does indeed marry Edgar in order to, as she believes, create some security for Heathcliff. She thinks that she can use her husband's money, and Heathcliff, just as it happened in the movie, overhears her talking to Nellie and then decides, I'm gonna peace out. So he's gone for a few years, he comes back, she's married. He suddenly has a fortune that no one knows where it came from. And then he decides to get revenge. And Kathy does end up dying in childbirth. She gives birth to a daughter who they name Catherine. And Catherine Linton then ends up falling in love with Heathcliff's son, who he has with Isabella. He does indeed get married to Isabella. It is definitely a toxic relationship, not like that, more so in the sense of he definitely beats her, and there's certainly some sort of assault. She is not as naive as she is in this film. She is definitely sheltered. She's Edgar's sister instead of his ward, and she ends up running off to London to escape Heathcliff, has her son, who she names Linton, aka her original last name, and then she dies, because everyone just randomly dies in this book. And then, well, maybe not randomly, but anyway. And
I think it's a tool.
Yes.
For the character.
And you know what? Fair enough. Like, I do it in The Sims all the time. And then Linton comes back, and Edgar's like, congratulations, little Kathy. You now have, like, your cousin living with us. And then Heathcliff's like, no, that's my son. So Heathcliff adopts Linton, or, brings him back to Wuthering Heights. There's also a whole other character, Hindley, which is Catherine's older brother, and in the film, she combined Hindley and Mr. Earnshaw. So Hindley was really horrible. He has a wife named Frances who, guess what, dies in childbirth. And their son, Hareton, then becomes the ward of Heathcliff after Hindley dies. I know I'm giving you like a lot right now. I will stop soon. And then Hareton essentially ends up becoming like the Heathcliff of that generation. He's a servant. They all make fun of him for being illiterate, and then every time he tries to learn how to read, they then are like, you're so stupid. So then he burns a bunch of books. And long story short, which is really enjoyable, and I do recommend this novel, essentially, Lil Kathy and Linton end up getting married, and it's all so that Heathcliff can take over her deed and will and all of the land that she owns. And Linton ends up dying because he has like some tuberculosis or something. And then Heathcliff dies because he keeps seeing Catherine's ghost. He definitely has some sort of dementia or just mental faculties are failing him. And at the very, very end, Hareton and Lil Kathy end up together and in love too. In love, they're happy. She's like, I'm so sorry that I made fun of your illiteracy, Hareton. I'll teach you how to read now. And he's like, every time I get a sentence right, kiss me. And she's like, ooh. That's literally in the last 5 pages. And then Heathcliff is like, this would be the perfect time for me to get my revenge on all these people who were super racist and oppressive to me, but I'll just die. And so then he dies, and Nellie's like, oh, I watched all these people live their lives, and I'm Nellie. So there you go. That's pretty much the book. You don't have to read it now, but you can. Thank you. So, yay! Now I'll let the professionals really talk. So, hey guys, Claire again. I just would love for each of you to briefly, introduce yourselves and tell us about your experience with Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Have you read the book? Did you enjoy it? Etc.
Shall I start?
Please.
I'm Abby. I'm a professor and librarian at UNC Charlotte. I was an English major. Yay! And and I was required, Wuthering Heights was required reading. I really like British literature, but I just finished rereading it like 2 nights ago, and to be honest, I didn't remember the second half of the book at all, but I'm so thankful for the second half because I thought the book was horrible. I didn't think there were any redeeming characters in the book at all until little Kathy kind of grew up. So that's really my, most recent experience with Wuthering Heights. I don't suggest reading it unless you like it's a good, how would I describe it?
Dark.
Very dark, very not very well behaved people who almost deserve what they get.
Hey there, I'm Andy Wertz. I was also an English major at Queen's. And I remember dressing up as Branwell Bronte for...
Guys, if you don't know Branwell Bronte, please look up the Bronte's portrait, and you'll just see almost like this alien beam happening in the center of all the Bronte sisters, because Homeboy literally was like, oh, I should not appear in this portrait. So anyway, sorry, continue, Andy.
So I had to dress up as him for a tea party at Dr. McGavran's house for the Bronte's course that we were taking. And then I remember most fondly sitting in that class one time, and another student just kind of came out and said, I really want to love like Kathy and Heathcliff, because whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. And then our professor just shot her down immediately and said, "You do not." And that's awful. And I have also recently revisited the book. And now with a little bit more age and wisdom, I think I just cannot find the pity that I think the movie wanted us to feel for Heathcliff in there.
Hi. So my name is Balaka Basu. I was also an English major. But currently I am also a professor at UNC Charlotte, where I work on literature and media and culture for young people. My experience with Wuthering Heights, I think, predates probably many of yours. I think I read this novel when I was 10, which is not age appropriate. But because of that, I have a deep and abiding love for it. I did not reread it before the movie because I happened to see the director, Fennel, interviewed on a red carpet, and the interviewer asked her why was it that she had chosen a white actor to play Heathcliff when he is one of the few attested dark-skinned characters in the 19th century novel, especially as a romantic hero, big R romantic, not little R romantic. He's not romantic, like don't date Heathcliff. Yeah, and anyway, her response was well, I never saw him as a dark-skinned character. And the interviewer's like, well, it says so in the text repeatedly. And she's like, well, I just never imagined him that way. And I was inescapably reminded of the creation of the series Twilight, which I was reminded of a great deal as I watched this film. The quoting of Romeo and Juliet in odd and vaguely inappropriate places and so on and so forth. But I do think there is a certain fantasy of unpleasant romance that we have been taught as a culture to appreciate, and it is interesting to see that brought to life.
Completely agree. And for context, Bella Swan in one of the Twilight books is like, Kathy is all in the wrong, and Heathcliff is great. And it's just like, Bella, please read the book again. Oh my God. But to go to our second question / prompt, I'm so glad that you brought up the director and her comment on the red carpet. That blew my mind because I annotated the book this read, and I underlined every single time they described Heathcliff, and it's several times throughout the novel. Anyway, so writer-director Fennel explained the reasoning for the quotation marks around the title, which you may have noticed, Wuthering Heights, it was in quotes, because, and I won't do the British accent, I'll spare all of us, you can't adapt a book as dense and complicated and difficult as this book. I can't say that I'm making Wuthering Heights. It's not possible. What I can say is I'm making a version of it. There's a version that I remembered reading that isn't quite real. And there's a version that I wanted stuff to happen that never happened. And so it is Wuthering Heights, and it isn't. But really, I'd say that any adaptation of a novel, especially a novel like this, should have quotation marks around it. So I just want to say, hey guys, what are your thoughts on the film? Initial gut reactions? How many stars would you give it on Letterboxd? And do you agree or disagree with Fennel's reasoning for the reimagining of the Gothic novel? I have 2 more sub-bullets for that question, but I'm going to leave it there. So initial gut reactions and agree or disagree with the writer-director.
I can start. I don't know about the stars. That's such a subjective business, isn't it? But I found it extraordinary that this movie should air the same year that Hollywood decided that the Oscars should have an award for casting, because I think this movie should get a Razzie for casting. I think the movie makes so much more sense if you cast age-appropriate characters, if you understand that Kathy, in the process of marrying Linton is about, I don't know, 16 or 17, and Heathcliff is, of course, around her age. Linton is not that much older, actually, and Isabella is young. Like, when Heathcliff marries Isabella, she's 15. And so I think if you take that into context, this is very understandable, much like Romeo and Juliet, in that this is passionate teenage love, which I'm sure many of us have experienced. And it doesn't always end, it never ends well. So I think it was, in my opinion, very miscast, which is sad to me because I'm a big fan of Margot Robbie. And I thought everyone in the cast did a great job with the material they were given. But I did find it out of context in that way. The other thing I wanted to say about the quotation marks is, this is fan fiction, right? This is a novel that a lot of people love for reasons, and then but often you love something it not in what it is, but in what you imagine it could be, as she was sort of saying, and I think there's definitely a place for fan fiction in popular culture. I'm a big fan of fan fiction myself, but I would have had a greater respect for it if she would have advertised it that way. If she would have just come out and said, this is my fan fiction of Wuthering, instead of the quotation marks, which could be so interpreted in so many ways. Why not just be like, yes, this is my erotic fantasy of Wuthering Heights. And I put in a lot of BDSM. There's some BDSM in there anyway, but I really highlighted it for you. And this is how I feel about it. And I would have greater respect for her as an artist if I felt she would have been more honest with her advertising.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. This was definitely fan fiction. I was imagining what the AO3 tags would be.
It's full of AO3 tags.
And it's definitely an impression of the novel and its characters. It uses their names and the setting in that kind of way. But I think that she's also selling adaptation short in what it can be. Of course, every adaptation is going to have failings because of the limits on what a film will do versus what a novel will do. But I do think that she had some fun in there. This is going to be, it was very visually appealing. It kept my attention the entire time. The soundtrack was very moving, and I think the actors did do a great job with what they were given. But the age thing did kind of throw it off. It would expect these 30-year-old looking actors to understand and make better decisions and understand what the consequences of those are going to be. And then to have this kind of impression of Wuthering Heights, I think, is also a great invitation for new audiences of the book to possibly explore what that might be, and for themselves. But I could imagine 50% of this is an imagined kind of plot. I think we really miss out on the narrative of Wuthering Heights. Starts off with a person who is renting Thrushcross Grange, and he comes to visit Heathcliff, who is absolutely horrible to this new tenant. And it just sets it off at the very beginning that Heathcliff is not a good person. He is rough to everyone that he meets. He is horrible to them. And then he cries out in pain for Kathy when her ghost comes to visit. But I think that the movie itself has a lot of really great redeeming qualities in terms of its production design. Those costumes were fantastic. The set design was fantastic. It helped characterize the story in a way that a book can't.
Yeah, I agree with both of your comments, most of them. I would give it 2.5 stars.
Oh.
I think it was a little bit derivative of, I thought I was watching at some point a Tim Burton movie.
I also said Tim Burton. I did, literally, while we were watching it. It's the checkerboard floor.
It's the shiny material and the shadows that aren't exactly shadows of what they should, it just, it seemed very, a little bit campy in sometimes, but I think it was entertaining. It was for a 2 hour and 20-minute movie. In this day and age when our attention spans are really short, I thought that I didn't have trouble sitting through it. So It was a good movie. It was not a faithful adaptation. It was, they did Nellie Dean really, really wrong in this movie.
So
She was the only good character throughout the book, and I think that they did Catherine's dad badly. They did Linton badly. So I think I was more frustrated at the direction that she wanted to go in the storytelling. But that's, again, I didn't really like the book, so I thought, if they could take it, unlike, I think it's probably 50% of people that read it love it, 50% of people that read it can't understand why those other 50% of people like it. So, it is what it is. It's a movie. It's for entertainment. They had a great budget. They got really pretty people to be part of it. And in that sense, I think she was successful. I have a couple theories about the quotation marks. I think in MLA citation format, years ago, they used to put the title of a book in quotation marks. It's in italics now. There's no quotation marks anymore in citations.
It's quotations only if you have a piece of a larger work.
Okay.
It's in quotations.
Okay,
I don't know what she's trying to say.
I do APA, so.
Yes.
But anyway, so that's that's kind of what I think about it. It's her citing the material in terms of she's creating.
I like that.
And then also, wink. Hey, I'm gonna go see my friend tonight. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So those are the, how I kind of look at the quotation marks. And to be honest, I didn't notice them until someone had pointed it out to me. So I don't know if I answered all your questions.
You pretty much did.
Okay.
No, you crushed it. Thank you. We kind of addressed my two follow-ups were like, what do you think that Fennel should have incorporated into this adaptation, and what do you think remained true? And it sounds like, she used their names and the locations. I do agree with everyone's comments on the production design. I think that the production design was really, really impressive, and again, this is what that director does. She knows how to use settings and how to create a space. And I just want to shout out the skin room, aka Margot Robbie's bedroom. In the book, a skin room is where Kathy sleeps. At the time, this was a chamber-like bedroom that has doors to it. And then there's a bed in it. It was very common for individuals to sleep in that setting. And so Fennel was like, what if it was her skin? So they scanned Margot Robbie's skin. And so when he said, my wife's freckle, that is literally a scan of Margot Robbie's freckle and her veins that are on the wall. So it's very interesting. And she used that really bright crimson color that is described for the Linton's house in the novel. Is there anything else that you think that she did well?
Well, I thought the skin room was extraordinary. What I did find was, something that struck me as odd, I don't know, I would love to ask her about this, which is that the book itself is very outdoors. Mm-hmm. It's just everything happens outdoors. All the important stuff happens outdoors. The problem with being indoors is that outdoors is too indoors, the windows are all broken, the snow is always coming in, the weather is inside, right, especially in Wuthering Heights. And what I thought was an odd choice that I would love to talk to her more about is so much of it seemed to be shot on studio lots, as opposed to, I never got the feeling that I was in Yorkshire. And I remember talking to my best friend about coming to do this, and she was like, this movie looks terrible. And I was like, well, I'll wait and see. But I was like, it is not a very romantic love story, right, for Valentine's Day. And she said to me, the true love story here is Kathy, Heathcliff, and the Moors.
Yeah. The Moors were a character.
And they also, in kind of removing the Moors as a character, they also took out all of the supernatural stuff.
Yeah.
And so there were no ghosts. Ghosts are very important in the novel. And they took the Gothic horror, which is the horror of the house, right? What are the deep secret places in your house that you don't know about? What could they be hiding, right? And it takes that, the alcoholism and, the domestic abuse and, right, all these stuff that is hidden in the house. But this director decided to take that and make it body horror. And I thought the switch from the horror of the house and the winds versus like the horror of your literal body and septicemia and the death scene with the and then throughout the film, right, there were all these callbacks to genitalia, like Isabella's little book that she makes, and then posing them as dolls. It just became very body horror, and I thought that was perhaps an interesting comment on our times, in that we are less concerned about what's going on in our environment and perhaps more concerned with what's happening.
Good point.
Here.
I like that, yeah. I also want to call out too, Isabella at one point, it was a one-off. She's, what's the word? She's embroidering, and it is a penis ejaculating on her embroidery. And I was like, girl, you're so repressed. Oh my God. No wonder Heathcliff has this power over her later. But Abby, I feel like you were going to say something, or am I incorrect?
I think what she got right with the film was the depiction of obsessive love. Although I found it very titillating, it was nice to watch, but I think that and probably a lot of people could remember thinking back or going back to a time when you were in high school and you felt that, like, I will die if I don't get him. And I think that she did that well in the movie. But I was talking to Angel, my colleague, right after the movie, and most of the time I was just shaking my head. Like, no, girl, that was not right.
I did the same thing. I actually had my hands out like, what? And I felt bad for the 5 people behind me. A big piece of the plot of Bronte's novel and the character Heathcliff is the fact that he is a non-white character, and his race remains ambiguous, but his skin color is described as dark, and he is considered other to characters such as Edgar and Hindley, who does not appear in the film. We already said that, Claire. We kind of already touched on this, but I'd be remiss not to talk about it again. But what are your thoughts on the whitewashing of this film, as well as the race swapping of Edgar Linton's character? And do you believe that there's an adaptation of Wuthering Heights that gets it right when it comes to the commentary of race and class in the novel?
I think you definitely get to it at the end that, like, race and class are so bound up with each other inside of this novel. And a lot of Wuthering Heights is economic in terms of who possesses the house. Thrushcross Grange is a much nicer home, and it's been, entailed in this way that Heathcliff will get to benefit after Isabella dies, and he'll get to possess it. And that possession is both economic and in the relationship between Heathcliff and Kathy. I think that we really missed out on the father's kind of, he was so much more awful in the movie by combining him with the abusive older brother. And when he dies in the beginning of the book, they cry over his body. And he loved Heathcliff. Heathcliff was his preferred son over his son that was much older and got sent off to college. And in doing that, I think that this movie missed an opportunity to kind of nuance that relationship between race in here and economics. I think it's very interesting that she still race swapped the other characters, but wasn't willing to do it for Heathcliff. And I remember reading that she said, I wanted to cast Jacob Elordi because he looked exactly like the illustration on my childhood book.
Yeah, he definitely, at one point I was going to bring some images of previous Heathcliffs, but perhaps the most famous movie Heathcliff is Laurence Olivier, who plays both Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice and Heathcliff. Those are 2 people who should not be played by the same actor. But anyway, so this idea of like Heathcliff as like a dark-haired, Latin lover type, whatever, right, is definitely prevalent. But what I think is so interesting about the movie, and you know, the race swap Nellie Dean, for instance, as opposed, and the race swapped Edgar Linton, we're not doing anything to Heathcliff or Kathy, is really just, to me, a sad, tragic outgrowth of this episode of what we used to call in the 90s color blindness. Yes. It was such a plus to say you were colorblind. And I was thinking, it's such a privilege to be able to be blind to race. It really is only white people who I think are able to say, I don't see race, and then I'll just cast for whoever, because it turns out that humans, particularly in the Western world, look at people and instantly judge people by what race they are and feel that there is a connection between the darkness of your skin and the socioeconomic class that you're allowed to inhabit, particularly in 19th century England. And so I think, you know, this is a way for someone to say, well, it's not like I only cast white people in the Wuthering Heights movie. There are plenty of people who aren't white. So you get away with it there, without actually having to address any of the issues of Heathcliff in the novel continually being referred to with slurs, right? They call him a gypsy, which is slur for the Romani people. They call him a Lascar, that's a slur for a person of South Asian or Indian origin. So that is very much present in the book. And his line is not allowed to persist. He does have a son with Isabella, and that son has to die and cannot like spawn further. Heathcliff is in the end erased entirely from the lineage of Wuthering Heights, and that's part of its tragedy. And I think to erase that is such a disservice to the novel that a very young girl from Yorkshire who managed to conceive of this wild and wacky novel, right? She's a minister's daughter, right? And she died very young. This is her only completed novel.
It's the only novel.
And it is wild. You know, many people think it's a better novel than, say, Charlotte, her elder sister Charlotte's Jane Eyre. And so I think it's a wild disservice to someone who obviously didn't have a great experience of the world herself, but had a clearly very keen and observing eye. And I felt that was obfuscated in this movie, and that, for me, makes me sad for Emily, who I have a attachment to.
Emily B.
The Brontosaurus sisters.
I want to be mindful of time. We have about like 6 minutes. I know, why am I timing it so intensely? But I want to open it to the audience. Did anyone have a question? Or please, and feel free to project. So go for it.
I'll try. How do you think adaptations of classic literature like this change or shape the discourse outside of the literature world?
That's a good question.
Oh, I think I'll just quickly say that I think adaptations make classic literature a little bit more accessible to everyone. I mean, 10 Things I Hate About You, that's like my favorite adaptation of Shakespeare's work ever.
Clueless.
Clueless also is very good. So I think there's some commentary on the original literature in these adaptations, but regardless of what the commentary is, it's making these classics more accessible to people who don't have the time or the energy to sit with the denseness of these, classics.
Yes, it does make them more accessible, and I think it can also spark re-interest in the novel and reimaginings. So people who will come and see this may be their first introduction to Wuthering Heights, and they can go out and do more and creative things with the project. Whereas adaptations will always fail for certain people, and I think a lot of people also, it's kind of fun when they aren't living up to your expectations, but any kind of book will necessarily get re-energized, and this will enter into the cultural conversation once again, and people will be talking about okay, well, why isn't Fennel addressing race in casting a good Heathcliff? And then I think that it can also shape probably what a lot of literary critics will come out and do with this work as well, because I'll have to talk about this adaptation because this is a huge one. Like the publicity that this is receiving, it's going to go much further than like the 2011, TV miniseries, and yeah.
My thought is pretty much what y'all said already. I guess my hope with these kinds of things is always that my love for fan fiction is because it extends a hand forth to the audience and it says, hey, isn't this a fun world? Aren't these fun people? Don't you have opinions about these people? Are you Kathy? Are you Isabella? Are you Nellie? Are you someone else who wasn't in the story? What would it be like if Heathcliff was a woman? Or whatever, right? And so my hope is that they always serve as an invitation. That, you too can come and play. You can make your own version. Why not? Baz Luhrmann made a movie called William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which is, the audacity. But it's a great movie, and it brought many people to Romeo and Juliet who had not previously known it. I also think, for me, often when I love a book very much, I am always, except perhaps with like Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, I think I've always been a little bit unhappy with most adaptations, and then I have fantasies of correcting them. I think that inspires a lot of people. But what I hope is that someone watches this and then is like, oh, what if I read the novel? What if I got an audiobook version? What if I actually dove deeper? What if I went and saw the Laurence Olivier movie? What if I...
They'd be like, where's the sex?
Exactly. I guess my only slight concern with a movie such as this is, what is it about love that we are glorifying here, right? This is a movie that has been marketed as a romance. We're showing it on Valentine's Day. It's meant to be a romance. Tragic, perhaps, but nevertheless romantic. And I do, wonder if narratives like this shape what we look for a little bit in our partners in real life, Do we watch this and think, may this love never find me? Or do we watch this and think, where's my Kathy? Where's my Heathcliff? Why doesn't anyone love me like this? And so I do have concerns about what these stories tell us that we should be looking for. But I think as long as we realize that the makers of these movies are just people like us, playing with toys in a common toy box, and that the toys belong to us just as much as they belong to Emerald, Fennel, or anyone else, then I think it's great. And I think there's a deep well here from which we can all draw water. I think we should just make sure that the contaminants aren't passed on to successive generations.
Well, we could go on and on and on, but we've got another audience coming in to watch, quote unquote, Wuthering Heights. So thank you all so much for sticking around. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. And I just invite all of y'all, keep on checking out what IPH is playing. We've got some incredible film series going on this month and the next. And I hope to see you next time at the movies.
And I'd love to get a group photo. You can just put your microphones right on.